Well, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am, as usual, Jodelle with my big floating melon. And today I am excited and happy to have back on the podcast Matt Maruca. So Matt is a 20-year-old entrepreneur, biohacker, sunlight lover, and founder of Raw Optics and creator of kind of a new thing we're going to be talking about, the light diet. So Matt, I'm super excited to have you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today, so I'm happy. And I love what you're putting out. And the last time we talked, we had such a great conversation that I really think it spurred on specifically a younger generation to look at their lifestyle, but also all of us can look at our lifestyle. And me personally, Matt, I find myself more and more pulling away from technology and craving more of nature, outdoors, and freedom from devices. And I've found that my health has actually improved vastly more than just sticking to some sort of diet or exercise program. The more I detach from devices, the more I reconnect with the earth and sunlight, the better I feel and the more health improvements I've had. And I love what you're putting out because you stand for this as well. And so that's why I brought you back on to talk about this. So enlighten, if you will, my listeners as to why, a food-based diet isn't it. It's a fraction of our health. It's not the end all be all. And I think people are missing something, Matt. What are they missing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As time's gone on, I've been able to refine the answer to this one. And I'm very glad that actually we're able to do a podcast a year later, because I was kind of wondering, what else were we going to talk about? So that's a great question to start with. Basically, just people who haven't heard the interview before, the last one, my background is that, well, I'm 20 now. When I was about 14, I got interested in health. I was using diets to try to improve my health issues and eventually sort of hit a barrier, sort of hit a wall, if you will. I couldn't really advance. And essentially, food isn't it in order to solve chronic diseases, because the best way to put it is that food is an input to our mitochondria, which are the cellular engines that process food and make energy. The research available today has shown that the modern chronic diseases that we're facing are caused by dysfunction of our mitochondria. So essentially, mitochondria are the cellular engines that keep us alive. And when they work well, we work well. And when they don't work well, we die. And if they slowly, or I should say if their function is diminished but not completely, destroyed, then we have diseases in that middle ground between functional, completely dysfunctional, and not really optimal, but not totally failing. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that if all these diseases, this is from a researcher named Dr. Doug Wallace from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, if all these diseases are showing signs of mitochondrial dysfunction, it would make sense to look at, okay, what causes mitochondrial dysfunction? Mm-hmm. So when people come in with these claims today in the food world saying, oh, well, this diet can, whether it's the vegan saying that meat causes cancer, or the paleo dieters or carnivore dieters saying, vegan diets cause cancer and sugar causes cancer, neither are correct, because it's mitochondrial dysfunction that is the key metric of cancer and other modern chronic diseases of what's going on. Now, the key researchers in this field haven't actually dove deep enough to really look at why these are happening. They're still stuck in the research paradigm where they're looking for drug solutions and so on. Mm-hmm. But basically, if it's because it's being shown that mitochondrial dysfunction is the key metric in these chronic diseases, it would make sense for us to look at what's causing mitochondrial dysfunction. And it turns out that the main disruptor of mitochondrial function present in our modern world is the indoor lifestyle, where we're living under artificial light at night, which disrupts our natural production and secretion of melatonin, which is the key repair molecule for our mitochondrial DNA, which allows our mitochondria and therefore the rest of our cells and our organ systems to function properly. So yeah, that's essentially the issue. It's too much artificial light at night and not enough sunlight throughout the day, in particular during the early morning hours, to set our circadian rhythm and stimulate the proper natural production of our hormones and other biological processes throughout the day. So the real cause of these diseases is an indoor lifestyle, not enough sunlight, and too much artificial light at night. So then when someone comes along, and so these things have been getting worse, and so the diseases are getting worse with them, significantly worse. So then someone comes along and says, okay, well, I think it's because of the food and GMOs and vaccines and other things that are chemical things that are affecting our body. I think those are the causes of these diseases. So if you cut these out, or you do this diet, or you do that, it might help some people because it is reducing an additional burden on the system. And so that's why a lot of these things work, but none of them work for everyone because they don't address the root issues. And so really looking at the mitochondria is the way to address the root issues, because literally almost everyone in the industrialized world today is living a lifestyle where 90+% of the hours are spent indoors, less than 10% or even less are spent outdoors. And so we're really destroying our biology because, like I said, sunlight drives our circadian rhythm, which drives our sleep, melatonin production, and health, and artificial light totally destroys that. And that's the epitome of almost everyone's life today: screen devices, tech addiction. The best way to summarize it in one sentence is kids used to play outdoors and now they don't. And so things are only going to get way, way worse over time. So, a little long-winded, but you get the idea.
Yeah. And I completely agree, because what we're looking at is a junk artificial environment, no matter if it's the lighting, but also, like you were mentioning, the food system. I mean, most of the processed food, the GMOs, those are artificial. So again, everything goes back to being artificial. But the biggest player, the root cause, like you said, you're going to see some minutia of results with a diet. But really, when it comes down to it, you're going to see a plethora of results when you dial in that natural environment versus the artificial indoor environment, like you said. So,
just to add to that, some people will see huge results from certain diets, like I did when I first went onto the paleo diet after having been like a French fry vegetarian for a long time. Like they say, a vegetarian who basically eats crap, which is probably the majority. And so I went on to, the paleo diet, and I started feeling amazing. Like my gut symptoms totally disappeared very quickly. So some people will have huge results from diets. Many people do the carnivore diet today, where their autoimmune symptoms finally they go dormant. Doesn't mean the issues still or is solved. They think they're healed and solved, but they're actually not, because if they eat a single blueberry or a piece of a sweet potato, things people have been eating for thousands of years, then their whole body goes crazy. They're blaming the plants for a problem that people didn't have until a recent time, caused by our recent advancements in technology. It's not the plants, it's their environment and their lifestyle that's causing their problem, where they can only eat meat to feel okay. That's the state of the carnivore diet, just to be clear. Now, doesn't mean that plant foods are even optimal for humans, or that we shouldn't be primarily carnivores or specifically pescatarians for the high DHA requiring human brain. That's actually optimal, I think, at present. But still, the fact that they can't consume any plants, it's a reflection of their environment and what they're not aware of, not of fact, basically. So some people will feel better with diets, is the point. But ultimately, we have to be looking and addressing these root issues, which is way harder than changing diets too. Like, it takes a lot of time, often moving to a different environment, away from high population density areas. And some people just aren't willing to do that. So they'll do all the middle fixes, but not quite achieve the results they're going for. But it's just, that we have to look at things holistically to get towards the root.
Yeah. And so what are the symptoms, you would say, of being disconnected from nature, from human nature, of being outside and connected to the earth and grounded and in sunlight? What are those symptoms that people are going to look at and not even know that maybe it's a symptom?
Yeah, I mean, so I lived that life and still do to a large extent. So I can throw out my ideas. Although I do what I call the light diet, I don't make a claim to be even close to the level that like an ancestral human could be at in health, having grown up being conceived in a healthier environment, developed in a healthier environment in the womb, from healthier mothers, eating healthier foods and living a healthier lifestyle, outdoors my whole childhood. So I, growing up, was feeling headaches every day. It took me a long time to fall asleep. I was having gut issues like gas and bloating, lots of allergies, lots of anxiety, lots of depression, you know, at least the symptoms of it, not necessarily clinically diagnosed for those who are easily triggered in the audience. But so that's some of the things I felt. Other things might involve, you know, any gut issues, GERD, you know, when people get acid reflux, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, autoimmune diseases, cancer, diabetes, obesity, weight gain of any kind. You know, those are basically all of the modern chronic illnesses or diseases, and even things that aren't considered illnesses or diseases in general, maybe just illnesses like anxiety, depression, and sleep issues and that sort of thing.
So pretty much everything that is kind of the mainstays of dis-ease today that we know of in mainstream medicine, people go to the doctors 90% of the time for things like digestive illnesses and heart-related issues. And all of these things are things that you're saying are related to not being connected to nature and being out of doors in sunlight. So what would happen if somebody just decided, okay, I'm not going to do much about my nutrition and my exercise program, but I'm going to start to look at my indoor artificial environment, and I'm going to try to be outdoors more and see what that does for my health? What can they expect when first starting out?
I mean, again, like I said before, these things sometimes take a lot of time, but in general, if someone makes a concerted effort to go out every morning in morning sunlight, especially if they live in a place where the sun shines through the clouds, because there is still plenty of sun where it's cloudy, just not as much as where it's not cloudy. But there's still plenty of natural light to stimulate these processes. That's the key for people who are concerned about, you know, if it's winter or it's cloudy, there's still plenty of light, good light that you can use even on a cold, cloudy, wet, rainy day. So you'll generally have just higher mood, higher energy. You know, there's studies on people with seasonal affective disorder that showed that they had, you know, significant reductions in seasonal affective disorder just from a 1 hour walk every morning. So these are the sorts of things, you know, just mood boost, increased energy, because light literally via our eye and our skin, but especially our eye, catalyzes a ton of different biological reactions. The actual light itself powers a lot of breakdown of certain molecules in our bloodstream so that they can more quickly convert. For example, like converting tyrosine into dopamine. When we're able to have, when we have UV light present on our eyes, it basically increases the rate of reaction of these reactions basically in the brain and so on. Same thing with our sex hormones, serotonin, other natural painkillers that our body produces when we're in the sun. So a lot of things are improved when we're in sunlight and natural light, a lot of things.
Yeah, and the typical person is getting up in the morning in their home, not going outside, getting in their car, driving to work, sitting behind a computer, working all day in an indoor artificial environment, and then maybe if they do leave the office, they put on sunglasses to go outside. So what then can they start to do? So this is the average individual that's missing out on complete sunlight exposure that they could be having. Where does someone start when they've been living this indoor life for a time now?
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm going to add one other thing that, you know, that's been really big for me in the last year is that I've started learning more about, and we'll get to that question, but I've started learning more about the mind-body connection, you know, and there's a couple researchers who come to, or researchers and like people out there who are great experts. One is like Dr. Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar with him?
Yes, I love his work.
Yeah, so him, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Dr. Barry Morguelan, who's an expert in, he's less well known than the other two, but he's an expert in an ancient Chinese source energy practice. He's the only Western grand master of that tradition. You know, there's these sorts of folks who, and many others out there who have done, you know, they're taking ancient wisdom from, you know, whether it's Jesus, Christianity, Buddha, you know, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Ayurvedic teachings, traditional Chinese medicine, ancient Chinese like Qi practices, Qigong, and so on. They're taking this wisdom and using it to channel the inner light that we have inside of us and to optimize that. And I just want to disclaim for anyone listening to this, like that is also, from what I've been learning in the last year, like absolutely super critical. And if we for example, go into a really healthy environment and we're doing all this stuff with our sun and everything, you know, all of our exposure, but we have like, let's just say serious trauma in our body, which, you know, I'm not even, because I haven't studied this, I'm not sure how it physically is manifested in the body. But, you know, some people might say like contractions in the nervous system or contractions in our energetic system, just little, you know, contractions, essentially, things that are tight, and certain things tickle them and we react negatively based on old conditioning and patterns, all that stuff. They use these disciplines to undo those patterns, conditioning, traumas, and so on, break them free so that we can see more clearly. The best analogy is like imagining the chakra system or the spine essentially as a straight line. It's like there's all these little kinks, and the goal is to just slowly work them away so that we're clear and energy flows properly and we can see things clearly as they are, which is like basically the state of enlightenment, and that's sort of the goal. So I just say that because, you know, many people will listen to this, and people who are familiar with those disciplines will say, oh, but, you know, this stuff doesn't even matter because, you know, if you get all that stuff right, then you're good. But actually that's not true, because there's lots of people who I'm, you know, aware of who have gotten, you know, put a ton of energy into the external or the internal work, but their external environment's horrible, whether their diet's bad or they live next to a cell tower, they use their cell phone all the time, they physically look sick. So they might be able to, you know, again, they might physically look sick on the outside and be thriving on the inside. And it's just taking time to manifest externally. But in general, you know, neither can be used alone, I think. You know, again, I'm not 100% sure about that, but if based on the research, if you're surrounded by EMF, bad electromagnetic fields, you never see the sun, your circadian rhythm's off, you're getting blue light at night. If you have a super strong, you know, aura and energetic field and you're super dialed in, you'll probably be able to withstand the effects of that maybe your entire lifetime really well. But most people don't have that. So by strengthening the inner light and looking into those names of those researchers and people that I mentioned, people will be able to both improve their resilience to this, you know, bad environment. But the thing is that people also shouldn't make the mistake, I believe, of saying, oh, but if I dial all that stuff in, then I don't have to worry if I live under a cell tower or put my cell phone on my head. Maybe the best example to show where this comes together, at least in my mind, that I've been able to think of is, for example, if I stop breathing, you know, that's like a biophysical action. I'm depriving my mitochondria of oxygen, and therefore they can no longer continue to produce energy and generate energy from our food, which is the vital reaction that's always keeping us alive. And so no amount of thinking, energy channeling, anything would allow me to overcome that deprivation of oxygen. Like eventually I'll die, whether it's a couple minutes or a couple hours, like I'll be dead, you know? So that's probably for anyone who's thinking, who's, you know, sold on that way of looking at things. That's like the best example I can give, because you can't think or energy your way out of needing to breathe. Same thing with like a cell phone, cell towers. Like these affect biophysical things in our body. You may be able to channel your energy to repel it, but it's still harming you. And it doesn't mean it's not harming you just because you're pushing it away. It's taking your energy to mitigate the effects. And so the smartest thing would be to both super channel dial in the internal stuff and get the external stuff dialed in. So because I'm not an expert on the internal stuff and have loads of work to do on that, we are focused on the external stuff. But it's important that I like to give people the whole context so that they can know that it isn't one or the other. It's actually both, very much so. And they're quite one and the same. So to get to your question, yeah, if you actually want to talk about that though, you know, I'm more than glad.
No, I see where you're coming from, and I wanted to reiterate it a little bit because I love that philosophy of like, there is a good point of mindfulness, but let's say somebody does all their meditation on the apps on their phone, and they sit in their living room on their couch doing their meditation. I think they're missing the mark of, you can do a meditation outside away from your phone and have way better results than on your, you know, little Headspace app.
Exactly.
Sitting on your couch, you know. So there is the element of mindfulness, but it should be done in combination with going back to human nature, which is being out in nature.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And that's spot on. You know, we can bring in sunlight and actually use it to elevate our state and so on. So just, yeah, you're totally right on the money there. So yeah, that's sort of the thing. So your question was, what are the steps for people to begin? Essentially, what are the steps of the light diet as I would recommend it?
Yeah.
So the easiest things to start with, It actually starts, I used to start with watch the sunrise in the morning, but it actually starts with, I realized this summer in continuing to, refine this, it actually starts with going to sleep early. And that starts with wearing blue blockers at night,
Yeah.
when the sun goes down. And then even that, getting the proper secretion of melatonin while wearing blue blocking glasses to filter the wavelengths of artificial light that disrupt our natural melatonin production and secretion, that initial stimulus for melatonin actually comes from the sunrise. So it kind of is a revolving cycle. But for someone to think about it, I would recommend wearing blue blockers in the evening to increase the natural secretion of melatonin and speed it up. As soon as the sun goes down, put on blue light blocking glasses, good quality ones like the ones I make at Raw Optics. There's some other brands that also do a good job, but 99% of them on the market are really bad because they are clear lenses that don't block any of the harmful wavelengths. Most blue blocking glasses don't block the right wavelengths around 455 nanometers, which is where the emission is. If you look at a spectral chart of an LED light, just Google for anyone interested. I homework right now. Just do this now if you're listening, or if you're in the car, don't do this. But Google spectral curve of an LED, and you can see the rainbow broken apart, and there's a big blue spike at 455 nanometers. If your glasses are blocking everything up to 420 or even to 440, they're doing nothing, because the only lights that emit anything around 420 are fluorescent tubes. So in that context, you can be protected in cool white fluorescent buildings, but LEDs are the lighting of the day. But so anyway, back to the the thing. It's wear the good blue blockers at night, and night blockers are supposed to be orange or red, the ones that actually work, because that's blocking all the blue. If you block all the blue up to 500, they're going to be deep orange. If you block up to 550, which is the majority of the green light, which is also somewhat stimulatory to our melatonin and circadian rhythm system, then the lenses are going to be deep orange red or even entirely red. And that's how you know you have really good blue blockers. But again, you'll want to have them verified and measured and so on. Anyhow, with that all being said, that's the step for the night. The step for, I go to bed before 8 every night almost. So you want to go to bed, that's great. But you want to go to bed like as early as possible so that you can get as many hours as you need, whether it's 8 hours or 10 hours before the sun comes up. And so, and then you can be up before the sun comes up naturally without an alarm. I don't recommend alarms from my own experience because it's really stressful for the body and it can disrupt REM. Everyone knows that alarms really stink. So you don't want to use an alarm. You just want to go to sleep early enough. Now, if you have to, if you're just always sleeping in, it would be helpful, I think, to use an alarm maybe in the beginning just to get the thing awake. But if you can't bring yourself to go to sleep early enough to wake up for the sunrise, you're going to have a lot of problems because the key hours of sleep are the earlier hours of sleep anyway. So with all that being said, those are the key steps of the light diet in the beginning, just resetting your circadian rhythm. And the third thing to add would be getting out in the sun, not just at the sunrise for 15 to 30 minutes, but actually later in the morning when the sun gets stronger and there's some ultraviolet light, so you can make vitamin D around 9, 10, 11, and so on, sometime around there. Ideally, like depending on where you are in the summer, the best light is from sunrise until 10 or 11. And then it's really strong and hard on the body, and we don't really need it at this time, although a little bit can be okay from, 10 or 11 until 2 or 3 when it's really strong, and then 3 to sunset. It's great. So after we're done with this podcast, I'm on Eastern time. It's 2:45. I'm going to go. It's a little cloudy, but I'll go and the sun will break through for me, and I'll get in a cenote, a cold. This is another thing you can do, but way further down. Getting in cold water because it allows us to assimilate light better and activates our own endogenous fat burning mechanisms, which really improves our mitochondrial function because of the physics of the way our mitochondria start to release infrared light as heat and the way that affects the water around the mitochondria. This is why if you just jump in cold water, you just immediately refreshed because it just gets our energy systems on fire. Like Wim Hof, the Iceman, calls his program Inner Fire because that's exactly what it is, literally. Literally inner fire, not like when people say literally but use it meaning figuratively. But it actually literally we're increasing our inner fire, which is the combustion of oxygen from the air we breathe with the hydrogen from our fat stores or the food we're eating, fat stores in the case of going in cold water generally, and then that's basically combustion. It's the same as a fire going on in our body. So those are the basic steps to the light diet. You could also consider, in addition to going to sleep with the sun and wearing blue blockers in the evening, waking up with the sun, and then getting later morning sun exposure and even afternoon if you can, then Drinking clean spring water is really important. Like, good quality spring water. Plastic bottles aren't optimal, but I'm living in Mexico and it's kind of hard to get around that at the moment. If I transferred it to glass, it would have still been in plastic for a while, so it doesn't make a huge difference. But a good quality spring water without chloride and fluoride, which are really bad for us for many reasons that we don't have to get into right now. Seafood consumption is amazing because if you think about living in the wild, it's a lot easier to harvest food than it is to hunt and find it, and sure enough, the research indicates humans didn't fish or hunt until much later on, thousands of years past when we evolved into humans, but we were consuming huge amounts of shellfish at the coast of Africa. And that's loaded with zinc, tons of other minerals and nutrients, vitamins, and in particular DHA, the omega-3 that builds up myelin sheaths that allows our brain to become complex and allowed us to develop the neocortex as we have it today. So basically, we want to eat a ton of shellfish like oysters, mussels, and clams. And then also shrimp is pretty good. Crustaceans, shrimp, lobsters, crabs. But the bivalves, oysters, mussels, and clams, and scallops are like the best, literally the best. I'm going to go have some for lunch soon. So.
I know, you're making me hungry, right?
Oh, I'm hungry already. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on grounding? Like, what is the importance of people putting their feet on the earth?
That's a great point. That should be a step of the light diet. That's like the only step that I don't have defined as a step, because to me, it's like it's implied with being outdoors. Like anytime you're outdoors, you should be either barefoot or barefoot or wearing grounded shoes, but barefoot's way better because you're more grounded. Unless you're in a major city where there's oftentimes there's no street wires above ground, they usually put them under the sidewalk. If you're barefoot, then you're toast. So you don't want to do that there. But anywhere else, it's good to be barefoot. And essentially, when we're barefoot on the earth, our body, because the earth's surface is negatively charged, our body kicks off, we kick off a lot of positively charged, basically positive charge, and that's like inflammation in our body. So there's tons of books and research on that as well that people could look into for more information. Speaking of which, because I'm in Mexico, I don't think they have this fancy insulation that we use. So like, I think the tiles on the ground floor where I am are actually grounded. Right. And I have this carpet below me, and I'm actually going to move the rug after our call so that I can have my feet grounded while I'm working and stuff. Thank you for making me aware of that. So that's going to be great.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an essential part of anybody who's getting rid of junk light and improving their environment for sure.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and no doubt. Another thing is, like, have you noticed incorporating more light into your own personal life? Do you feel like your appetite is more regulated? Have you noticed any weight loss or muscle improvement or anything?
That's a great question. So weight loss, no, because I always had the issue. Like, some people, when they have leptin issues, which is like our master energy accounting hormone, which is governed by light, they'll have too much weight, which is more common. Right. Actually, not necessarily. Too little weight is also extremely common. Like if you look at my high school where I, just from what I remember from my class, there were very few kids with healthy weights. Most, and the biggest contrast I saw was when I went on a foreign exchange to Eastern Europe, to Bosnia, where they're a little bit back in time in their technology and their use of tech and their diet and the way they live outdoors way more, and their food's way healthier. And they, again, in particular, they spend a lot more time outdoors, just walking around, not in cars all the time. Anyhow, so. And they're also important. Their mothers, so their parents' generation was even further back compared to like the United States. They're like literally living in farms and villages versus our parents' generation, or both mine and your parents' generation, were in offices oftentimes, so they come from better mitochondria from their moms. So they also have this advantage, even though because they've adopted the modern lifestyle, they'll quickly burn through it for their kids' generation. But anyhow, still, I was able to see that improvement in the body composition in the women who naturally I'd be attracted to myself, but also the men were just more fit in general. There's like, for example, in the States, what I'm describing is more people overweight, and many just, if they're not overweight, they're super skinny, which was me. But in a place like Eastern Europe or probably other, less developed countries where people are generally a bit healthier and have lower rates of these chronic diseases, there were very few obese and overweight kids, significantly fewer. I mean, it was unbelievable. They stuck out just like people would have, my parents have told me that the really overweight kid would have stuck out when they were in high school. Now it's normal. But back then, like that kid who was really overweight was like not that normal, or, you know, maybe it was 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it was there. So that being said, you know, yes, sunlight regulates key aspects of our metabolism, hunger hormones, and everything via our eye, via then the hypothalamus, which sits right behind the eyes around the pineal gland as well. So the hypothalamus is a master hormone and basically hormone regulator of the body and metabolic regulator. And it is directly connected to the eyes via the optical nerves. So it's very important, the influence of light on the metabolism. And essentially, there's tons of research, some of which shows that, for example, heliotherapists who treated their patients with sunlight in the early 1900s in the Swiss Alps, they one of the things they observed constantly or consistently was increased muscle tone, and they presumed it was due to thyroid improvement. Could be other things. But yeah, so their patients would just be really sickly, and they would just gain really nice muscles even without working out at all. And so that is something I've experienced. Like I would just say, not to brag, but I have a very, very solid physique for someone who literally works out never, almost. I mean, not that it's not good, or not that it's good to not work out. I'm not bragging about that necessarily. I just haven't been making it a key point to put in a really regular exercise routine. I mean, I play, I will swim in the ocean, I'll jump around in the waves, walk, but yeah, you get the idea. I don't pump iron.
Yeah, you're moving your body, which is what humans are made to do. They don't have to throw heavy
not as much as I should,
dumbbells around.
but yes, you're right. I don't move nearly as much as I should, but still, nonetheless, most people my age would kill to have the physique that I have. And I was one of the skinniest, palest kids ever from high school, or in middle school before I started doing this. Now, this is where it gets interesting. That's a great question. So for weight loss, it's very similar. Yes, your appetite should be regulated. You should generally maybe notice that you want to eat less, or at least when I first got into the light diet, I was eating a ton more because finally my metabolism was better regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And I was eating a ton, and I put on all this muscle basically without working out at all. My body was just saying what it wanted. Mm-hmm. Like I would eat such massive portions of food and meat. It was like, it boggles my mind that I could down that food. It's like I would go to they had these places called Rostil in Bosnia, which is just a grill restaurant, basically, where they would just grill all this meat. And I would order this like large portion of these amazing beef, veal sausages. And then I would order another. And I was back there recently, and I couldn't even down like one large portion. I was like, oh my gosh, I was getting 2 of these back to back. It was insane. Anyway, so one thing I will add is that I have friends who, they don't practice the light diet quite as much as I do, but they're pretty close, but still don't have quite the physical effects that I have been able to experience. And I actually started to put some pieces together in regards to the spiritual energy conversation. So for a man, for a woman, I'm not actually quite sure how it works, but for a man, there's something that's considered by many traditions a fatal sin, a deathly sin, and not fatal in the sense that someone's going to kill you for it, but fatal in the sense that you're killing yourself. Right. And that is to ejaculate on a regular basis. So I have come to firmly believe, and especially because so many of these traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, basically they all are in agreement on one thing. I mean, many other things too, but that for a man to regularly ejaculate or to spill his seed, if you will, is extremely detrimental. If someone were to do all the stuff I'm talking about on the light diet as a man, but have, for example, a girlfriend and she's, for example, using the pill, or I'm not sure what the term people use for it. Birth control is the term. Mm-hmm. So birth control or contraceptives, in nature, it'd be really hard to have natural sex without creating a child. And the whole point is that we're designed to make the children. That's kind of the whole purpose of it, right? So for a man to try to trick that system and get the pleasure of an orgasm on a regular daily basis while not doing the thing that it's actually made for, to generate a child, mm-hmm. can be very, very detrimental, because it's not that pleasure, the amazing, strong pleasure one would get from an orgasm is not coming from nowhere. It is energy that's being released out of the body. In a particular friend of mine who comes to mind, he has been doing the light diet pretty close to T, similar to where I have, although he hasn't been quite as much in tropical locations. But in a sense, he's been in college and I've been traveling the world harming myself. So he's at a more consistent circadian rhythm. So in a sense, he could even be doing better than I am. But he's consistently, I realized it, he's had girlfriends for most of high school and most of college, just like 2, where he was constantly basically spilling his seed. And so the reason I kind of thought of this, because I met someone this summer who was very knowledgeable about these subjects and explained to me how it is like the fatal sin. And I never realized he was so serious about it too. And so I looked into it more, the different practices of the different religions. And I realized, religions and spiritual disciplines. And I realized, wow, this is probably a bigger deal than I thought. So men beware, men beware, that can be, again, I really don't know how it applies for women orgasming at all. But if a man is doing the light diet, but constantly spilling his seed, then he might have trouble finding positive results in any aspect of his life, because motivation's always leaving the body. The vital energy is always leaving the body. So, I'm not an expert on that piece of things, but I find it very relevant to disclose, because this friend hasn't achieved the body composition I have. And that's one of the things that this expert I met this summer explained to me would happen. He said the body of an ejaculator would be someone who's just generally weak, gets a belly, and so it's doesn't explain everything and it's not fully right, but you get the idea.
I appreciate you saying that, because if we go back to the first humans, our creator told the first humans, fill the earth and subdue it, like populate the earth and subdue it. So he didn't give us that satisfaction of being intimate to just give us that pleasure. It was to procreate, like you said. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people do almost abuse that mechanism of the body for more than what it should be. So I think you're spot on with that. So like I was mentioning as the appetite, so humans, can we not derive a little bit of energy from the sun, just like a plant, like photosynthesis? What do you think?
We can derive a lot more than most people think from the sun. Significantly. Like I couldn't give a number, but I would bet at like up to 50 or more % of our energy, maybe 30 to 50% or more from the sun. Again, like there's some researchers in Mexico who I'm actually looking to dig into their work more, who are studying melanin and its ability to affect split the water molecule, just like photosynthesis does. And essentially, their whole premise is that we actually do photosynthesize via melanin and its impact with water, just like chlorophyll and its work with water happens in plants. And so we can't, and not that just we can, but we are designed to develop, generate a ton of our energy from sunlight. And so if you think about it, someone who, and you hit the nail on the head with that question last time, someone who doesn't get sun, you're asking great questions, by the way. Someone who doesn't get sunlight is going to need to eat a ton more to make up for that energy deficit. And still they're going to be deficient because, for example, like you can eat food all day and but you're not going to, for example, get the right wavelengths of light to make vitamin D, no matter what you eat. Even if you eat high vitamin D foods, it's not going to be as properly and easily used in the body as vitamin D made from the sun. So these are some of the things you'd want to consider. For example, people would want to consider in general. For example, the sun's like basically a big multivitamin. All the different many different wavelengths have functions that we're aware of, like vitamin D synthesized by the ultraviolet range. Specific wavelength in particular. Red light does things to improve mitochondrial function. So does infrared. Infrared acts on the water in our body. Green, purple, they all do different things. Ultraviolet does a ton of stuff as well. So to be deficient in sunlight is to be deficient in the most probably important multivitamin for our body. So much so that like everything works better when we have more light and when that inner light's also optimized. So we're, for example, nutrient deficiencies will be less common if we get more sunlight because all of our systems are more efficient. So we don't burn through stuff as much. I've actually had a huge problem with that from chronically traveling for 2 years. I was putting my body in so much chronic stress that, I totally damaged my metabolic function and systems where it got to a point where I was actually, here I am doing podcasts talking about health, beat myself up way beyond what would be reasonable, to claim to be like knowledgeable about health. Right. But, just by, working with people I've learned from, like Dr. Cruz before, looking at the issues and so on, I am able to, get right back on the right track, doing everything properly, the light diet. But it's a great kind of both negative experience, but also a really positive experience to grow. There was a point for me where I would my metabolism was so, let's say, damaged from, again, chronic travel, chronic circadian disruption. So I was doing the light diet, but in the context of being in Mexico, in Bali, in Europe. In 2 years, I was in Europe 3 times. I was in Mexico twice. I was in California. I was all around the United States. I was in Indonesia for 3 months, Norway, and just all over the place. And by the end of that, I would go to eat like a normal meal, and then I would just feel really sluggish, which is not good at all. Obviously, when something that isn't right, something's not right. Anyway, there's this really interesting vitamin called thiamine, vitamin B1. All the vitamins have really important functions, but thiamine in particular, vitamin B1, is really important in metabolism and mitochondrial function. And it's one of the really key supplements, where if we're living in a modern world today, because of, the overall decline in our systems due to a reduced environment and reduced mitochondrial function, or a harmful environment, we burn through thiamine and other molecules that I'm, beginning to research more into very quickly. And that is one supplement I began to use just very specifically, targetedly, briefly. And it made a huge difference for me in sort of helping to kickstart things back up, which I had really slowed down and damaged in the process of traveling. So for the business travelers out there, I've done the biohack, and you got to be really careful and mitigate your environment. It will hit you, even if you're 20 and you have tons of energy when, at some point.
I think these are all great tips, and I'm excited about this light diet. I wish more people would run with this, because our environments are where it's at. Like, it's changing your environment is changing your health. And so to recap kind of what you were saying, blue blocking lenses to improve the melatonin, and watching the sunrise, watching the sunset, getting some sort of cold therapy would be ideal during your day. Being outside as much as humanly possible for whatever lifestyle you lead, putting your feet on the earth, supplementing with B1, and then never negating the supplement, I call it, of the sun. All of these things can go a long way in improving one's health, more so than just jumping on the keto bandwagon or whatever, So, and like you mentioned, including seafood, but also eating foods that are, as local as possible to where the individual is, I would say, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you're getting, I'm in Mexico in strong ultraviolet light, based on the research that I'm familiar with, it isn't an issue for me to eat carbs, because my body is able to, process them properly, because I have the strong ultraviolet light. Yeah. Whereas if I was in a winter place, I would want to eat keto. Now, that's one thing that there's not as much research on. So, for example, some might argue it's better to be keto even when you're in a tropical sunny place or summertime. But I think it makes more sense to be keto in the winter, eating some carbs throughout, the summer when they're seasonally available. And that seems to be the most sensible path.
And your thoughts on social media? Like, can we detach from social media? We think we're keeping up with everyone, but without human interaction, aren't we just existing in a virtual world of isolation? And isn't that part of our problem as well?
That's such a great question. Honestly, yeah, I guess so. Almost, it's a great question, because it makes me reflect, social media and feeling that sort of facade of connection in the last couple of years for me, while I was traveling all over the place, sort of probably allowed me to continue to do that, because I didn't feel super disconnected. Okay. Whereas if I think about it, if social media didn't exist, I wouldn't have been able to, lie to myself and deceive myself that I've got, all these people I'm in touch with. I would have had to really go more into the local communities of the places I was visiting and really build relationships, which I didn't. So I think, it's definitely, I did some, but I didn't do it nearly as much as I would have, liked to, looking back on the times I was traveling. So I think it's definitely a really great point you bring up. And I think you're spot on. It's, but it's hard. It's hard. I keep social media. I say that I keep it for business stuff, but really, I don't need it So, you know,
No,
yeah.
it's good for all of us to ponder because there's good points to it, like you and I being able to do this right now, having the technology we have to be able to do this. But also, when the chips are down, it's that village that's right there with you that's going to be there for you. It's not the virtual village that are thousands of miles away that can go, oh, sorry, for what you're going through, and they can't really help you. But it's the people that's our local village that we really
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
bond with, and that's part of, a healthy human existence as well, I would say.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, cool. I figured you would be. Well, with that, I mean, I think we've touched on some really great points. I want people to know how to find out more about you and to find out more about the light diet and, how they can connect with you since we are talking social media.
Yeah, of course. Well, on Instagram, my profile is The Light Diet.
Okay.
Simple enough. And that's probably that's a good place. If someone has questions, I mean, honestly, I don't answer my Instagram messages generally because like I just don't have time. I don't want to do that generally. But
Right. Yeah. I feel you.
people can email if they have questions about raw optics, blue blockers, and glasses. You can email support@rawoptics.com,
Hmm.
and that's a great way. And follow me on Instagram, comment on my posts, and there's a shot that I will get back to you.
You
So
put some videos on YouTube, I see too, so that's really great.
a couple, not much, but there's some. I just put out a talk I did in
Hmm.
London, and I
Yeah,
would
I
say
like
honestly,
that.
did you check it out?
Hmm.
Oh, awesome, great. Yeah, I feel like you know, I actually haven't fully rewatched it, but in the moment when I gave it, I felt like, okay, I don't need to give another talk because I explained the whole premise of everything that I just talked about here with you very clearly, directly, to the point, and then through the solutions and the details of why. And it still all fit within like a 45-minute or 50-minute window.
Yeah.
So highly, highly recommend people check that out if they want more information.
I recommend it as well. Also, you have a recent blog post about big wireless making us feel like our cell phone use is safe, and I highly recommend people go read that. It's really, really
Yeah, I thought.
important that people know about that.
Yeah, I think that. Where was that on Raw Optics or on
At Maruca.com.
Maruca.com? Yeah, that's funny. I haven't. I don't know how recent it is. It might be
Well,
at
it
the
was
top,
last year, I think.
probably like last year. Yeah, months, but still, because I'm like, I haven't written a blog in a long time. But
It
yeah,
was one of your more recent, like if you go through and it's one
yeah,
of
of
the top
course,
three
a
or
big
four,
wireless. Yeah, of course. Well, that's so funny. Yeah, I haven't written many. I haven't written many blogs at all. It's so funny. I want to almost get
Well,
rid
and
of.
again, it goes back to when you're connected to nature, you want to disconnect from devices. And so I get that. Like it's hard to be on these right now because all you and I want to do is go outside and get into the sun and be in nature and go by water because honestly, that's what humans were built to do. And if you get away from that, it's easy to adapt. But once you get back into it, it's hard to go back into modern technology. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, I'm with you.
Cool. I knew you would be. All right. Well, Matt, this has been awesome as usual, and I hope to do this again in the future. Um,
Likewise.
yeah. So, like, keep me posted on the light diet and how it progresses, and we'll be looking forward to that.
I sure will. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's all go outside.
I'm going
Bye for
outside.
now. What's up, YouTube followers? Just a quick promo code for you of my show sponsor, dropandfbomb.com. You can get healthy oil packets like coconut oil, MCT oil, and their little pork sticks, salt and pepper pork sticks, no hormones, no nitrates, no artificial anything. Just really great ingredients that are quick and easy and on the go. Use my code GETFIT, GETFIT, to save 10%. And go to dropandfbomb.com today to get your packets of on-the-go convenient foods, healthy convenient foods. And it's a healthy way to drop an F-bomb today.